Good morning and welcome to November's rainy now Fireside Chat. So in this month's Fireside Chat, we are talking about full stack observability, or FSO, in particular around SaaS application performance monitoring, what it means for employee and customer experience, and of course what it also means to measuring and managing the bottom line from a cash perspective. We're going to dive a little bit into some of the tools available from Cisco and others, such as products like App Dynamics and Thousand Eyes, and of course the growing relevance of these tools in really helping to improve a business's efficiency, security, and of course overall performance of their applications in a hybrid, ever multi-cloud, and soon to be AI infused world. All the things we keep talking about. So as usual, I'm joined by members of our customer advisory panel. So again, thank you all of you for taking the time to join. We'll do some quick roundtable welcomes again, as always. So please just we'll go around a circle. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and just say who you are and where you're from, and then we'll kick off the show. So let's start with Ken.
Hi, my name's Ken Dickey. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Leithwaite Global Executive Search.
Thank you. Alex.
Hi, Alex Taylor. I'm the Group IT Director at AWIN.
And Jazz.
I'm Jazz Bassey, work for a law-led professional service company called Gately.
Fantastic. Now, we did have somebody else, but I think they don't have FSO and they're having some performance issues. Unable to join today, so quite. Oh, here he is. Look, there we go. Just in time. Can you hear us? I might come back to you. Go. Fantastic. But team, thank you so much for joining. I'd also like to welcome, before we kick off today, one of our technical experts as well. So Nathan Ashby, thank you so much for joining. Do you want to just say a quick hello and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm one of the specialists at Sicilian, so very much focused on driving the best business outcomes and value out of the technical solutions that are deployed.
Fantastic. That sounds like a LinkedIn profile. Fantastic. Thank you. Right. I think we'll kick off the show. And Nathan, I'm glad you volunteered to join the show because it means I can ask you all the questions today. So it takes the pressure off me. I was saying actually to some of the panel before we joined, I had one of the most scariest presentations to do yesterday, where I got asked to come in and do mystery reader to 36-year-olds, not 36. Which was more daunting, I think, than actually preparing for this morning. So, anyway, I digress. So, Nathan, can I pick on you first? Just to set the scene, right? FSO is a bit of a tagline. What is it? What isn't it? Tell us a bit about what FSO is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think importantly, we should focus on a little bit of a story to help provide context. So, if we think of typical IT solutions, and we've got a small slide that can demonstrate some of the challenges with this. If we think of a typical user journey, whether they're using their typical productivity apps, whether that be Outlook, Office tools, etc., or whether it be a bespoke app that you've built in-house, the scenario is really your users are expecting that to work all the time. I think the reality is, as we all understand in IT, there's sometimes bumps in the road. The challenge is, and the reason FSO has almost been coined as a phrase by some marketing teams, but the premise of it being that you have that full observability of the whole user journey, and you can take business insights into that. So it's not just a scenario you're saying that there's a local network issue, or that there's a server that's down, or a data center or service provider with issue. You're taking business context, hopefully, with that, to say, we've identified X has a challenge. This now means users will have a degraded experience in some form. So FSO really, at the highest level, is taking all those traditional monitoring and platforms that we used over the last 10, 20, 30 years and merging it into a very easy observability platform. So we understand immediately and quickly what the user experiences are or are not.
I think I get that. So I think essentially what you're saying is, it's really about, providing a set of holistic, real-time views of how different applications are interacting, and therefore how the overall performance is across infrastructure, wide area network, wireless, device, all those kind of things, regardless of the app. So it's not about having a platform that monitors, an AWS app or a Microsoft app or whatever it might be, and ultimately about trying to help IT, right, detect and resolve issues. So what is the issue? So actually we spend more time resolving the issue or shouting at people whose fault it is, than trying to work out what it is that's caused the issue. And it's funny, we talked yesterday about some similar scenarios at home, right? And I think I was describing over the weekend how it was really wet and rainy. The kids didn't want to do anything, and that kind of means that every device is on, the Xbox and Netflix and the Switch and whatever else, right? And it actually was just, I'm sure all our neighbours are doing the same thing. Virgin, awful at the moment. And it was just, you literally find you're spending all day trying to work out, is it the device? Do I reboot the router? Do I reboot the wireless? What is it? Or is it just the fact that the whole world or the whole street is on this stuff? Right? But it's really off-putting when you're trying to do this. And you think about that in a business context where we've got, hundreds of applications, many of them now outsourced, hosted by a third party, hosted in the cloud. These things are all trying to talk to each other. We've got more people working remotely, working through, BDI terminals, working through VPN connections and those kind of things. And ultimately, users expect, the best possible experience, right? So I think what you're saying is what these sets of tools are designed to do is to try and help with that troubleshooting.
Absolutely. You've nailed it, really. And it's all around, that user experience, a part of that journey, not just looking at if something's up or down. More importantly, is being able to correlate what that means to the user's journey, and then in turn providing actionable insights so that the teams can get to a quicker resolution, ideally, or ultimately, if you are absolutely correct, and some of my third-party solutions or systems that we don't manage or can't fix, that we can identify it very quickly and then get some form of workaround or that third party to ultimately resolve their systems.
Ken, if you don't mind, just because we were chewing this over before we started, I was going to ask you the first question, if you don't mind. But we've had, having lots of different applications is not a new thing, right? But I'm interested to understand today, if you do, or if you did in previous organisations, how do you monitor and troubleshoot apps and infrastructure today, and has that changed as we've kind of shifted from a world that was all on-prem into this kind of more hybrid cloud-connected world?
Yeah, so actually, I'll reference a past employer, actually, because I worked in the retail industry in Asia, and obviously just talking to that whole that user experience. Well, we're talking about customer experience. If a till goes down somewhere, and now I work for a very famous retailer that was considered one of the world leaders in omnichannel retailing, and their expectation is that it's an experience. Their stores are experiential because they don't expect you to buy in the store. They expect you to buy off your phone. They expect you to buy from a website, off your laptop, etc. The idea is you come into a branch, you would try on a very fancy, expensive pair of leggings and maybe a stretch or two, but you don't necessarily buy them there. But you've got to be able to pick up the experience, and you had to track how the systems were performing, and you could see that this was key. It was absolutely critical. So, and look, there was a massive investment there in very high-end systems that sort of allowed us to monitor and manage the platforms, the tooling, the support, the tills themselves, right through. And that whole point to Nathan, where if something fails elsewhere, we had fail safes, but it was also understanding that there was a degradation in service, so that if somebody was in a branch or a store somewhere, maybe 2 of the 3 tills were working because they've gone to a fallback system, or the fact that we have truly global live stock management. All of a sudden somebody's looking on their phone and it says there's a pair of black yoga pants, but there isn't actually on the shelf because things are broken down. So, and then informing the store management that that was the case was key to making sure that that level of service was was being maintained. And that was critical for a brand that was specializing in charging a lot of money for what are considered relatively standard athletic wear. And so it was part of that experience. It was key to their business. Now I'm in a different industry and a different environment where actually the service levels are very high. They are very well maintained and managed. I was mentioning earlier before we came on here, you know, my chairman and the board really they appreciate the difference between 5 nines and 4 nines. They don't really care. So when you start talking about availability, we've got to a point where our environments are pretty stable. The technologies have evolved, especially in less complex environments. And then it's a case of when you're looking at this observability, it's actually, can it be proactive? How can you identify? And then the problem we have in a smaller organization is I don't have the might of a massive retailer to go and buy a platform that can service that level of detail. So what are the alternatives? Because we are being questioned at the same time as IT leaders. Where is a return on investment? Where is the value? How can you prove to me that actually that level of service is better, even though it's gone from 4 nines to 5 nines? Is it material? And where are those returns? And so this idea of observability is not lost on me, especially as we move to environments where we are becoming reliant on AI platforms, etc. Where is their availability in the whole kind of ecosystem that firms are developing? I'm very fortunate we're almost completely cloud environment, so we don't have the complexities of on-prem versus hybrid versus full cloud. But, and as we said here, you know, I have been called out to explain how this move to an environment which is stable, is cloud, etc., is actually a financial improvement and a user experience improvement on the on-prem environment, which was considered really good value for money. I'm not going to say cheap, but good value for money. And this is where I think it's quite curious to get the experience. This is where I have had, and I didn't set it up at my former retailer, I'm not going to say their name, but I do know there was value in it. It's just a case of, is it worth the investment? You know, you can talk about some big products from the Cisco kind of tooling environment, but these don't come cheaply. And is there a return on investment in getting the full stack observability to tweak your operational excellence? And just one last little piece on that. You know, as markets become more challenging, as we get more headwinds, as AI comes into the fore, you know, sort of IT leaders are being asked about operational excellence more and more and more, you know, and it's one thing to talk about process and engineering, the right work at the right desk and all of those wonderful, fantastic buzzwords, but actually showing there is real merit in what we have done with our technologies, that those things are available, that we are removing grind and toil from it by using AI. And here is the evidence that this is available, doing all this work for us. I think is substantive. I think it really is important. It's another level of reporting to prove the worth of the technologies that we're delivering. But it's really nuanced. It's really nuanced because it's like I could go down a rabbit hole, a rabbit warren, whatever you want to call it, of going into looking into all this stuff and actually finding very little return personally as for a smaller firm than maybe a larger organization would have. And again, it's one of these pieces of where is the kind of that inflection point where it goes from being an expensive nice to have to actually being a really valuable sort of tool in the tool chest.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a really key point. And I think you're right. It's a bit like you say, the 3 nines to 4 nines to 5 nines. And generally, if you're building that yourself in your own systems, that's huge cost often to get from that. And I think you're right. A lot of the time, people don't realize what those things mean. They just become blur. You know, it's a bit like AI powered now, which is a term, you know, 5 nines. It's just a blur. And I think, as you say, there's what's the cost versus return of moving up that availability level. And I think when we look at things like, you know, the kind of tools that we're talking about today, then I think it's the same, right? I think if we think about the amount of time the reputational damage that poor performance, and your example of retail there is a great one, right? And I think particularly with, we've got Black Friday coming up, right? The experience and the way in which our systems operate, for those of, for the listeners that are in a retail world, of all of us as consumers probably going crazy and buying all our Christmas shopping and stuff in the Black Friday sales, that poor experience can cost real term money, can cause reputational damage and those things. But it's all about trying to put that quantifier between that. It's about predicting if there's going to be a performance issue, so looking at trends and looking at things that are likely to cause an issue, whether it's down to you or not, and then obviously the time it takes to remediate and understand, once you know where that issue is that something that you have control of remediating, or how many people do you need to shout at to kind of get the problem fixed, and what's the return? So I think your points there are
just I don't want to hog the line, but there's just one little piece that just triggered there with me, which is one of the things that we have got very used to over post-COVID. Everything is the commoditization of IT. Everything just works, right? And so across the board, whether it's your user community, it's your board, everything just works. And the assumption is that it will continue to just work is kind of lost on leadership, where you go, well, actually, there's quite a lot of effort in delivering this to be so commoditized. I.e., it's a bit like, and I use the utilities as a good example. People just go to a tap, they turn it on, and water comes out. And even when there's floods and everything else and dirty water, we still get clean drinking water. It's very rare that your electricity goes off. And it's a real shocker when it does. Now, these industries have been going for so many years, and actually they have obviously got full stack observability. They understand what happens when a power station turns off, what happens to the town down the road. And I think it's that kind of analogy I use with my colleagues, is saying, well, look, you've got to the point now where you expect your technology to be so commoditized that it's a utility. You just turn it on, it happens. Yeah. But around it now is a different type of infrastructure. It's not about buying a nuclear power station or a brand new power station. That's all well and good. It's actually making sure that it's always available, delivering at the times you need it. And that's where this tier comes in. And I think that's the kind of analogy I use, but it's still lost on people, because, again, if you ask most people where their drinking water comes from, they have no idea. The tap, right? That's it. Yep. And that's where technology is kind of ending up. And it's just an interesting piece. I think this full stack observability is one of these things which is quite hard to articulate unless you can kind of draw parallels in an environment where people go, oh yeah, actually, yeah, that's quite true. I never ever think where my water comes from or electricity. It's there, and it's a real nightmare when it's not. Welcome to the new world.
I absolutely love that. I love that example. I think Goa, you had a similar point, I think, to make, didn't you?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Just wanted to double check.
Yeah. Thank you for persevering and joining.
No problem. Yeah, I had some issues. Going back to your kind of analogy right at the beginning, if there's a problem somewhere, where is it, and what it means. So I'm on my phone. But yeah, I think Ken's point's really important, and for me, it goes back to kind of my experience when I first joined L&Q. We had lots of great tools that told us lots of good things, that told us about our environment, but we didn't have the right people to look at it or analyze it or really understand it. And full stack of observability is actually the next evolution of monitoring, as we've traditionally known it. And being ready for that is really down to a people challenge, and making sure you've got the right people. So, you can, if I dumb it down for a second, we have seen monitoring, looks at security incidents and events management. And, we had no one looking at what that told us, analyzing it. So the first thing we did was get people around that. And full stack of observability is an even wider piece in the grand scheme of what we're trying to understand. So this isn't just about something's on, something's off, traditionally SolarWinds and all these things will tell you these great things. But actually it's about, what does that mean for the wider context for the business, and who can understand what that means? So if we've got a server down, what does that mean to the business, and making sure that we can connect those dots. So we can spend all the money in the world in getting full stack observability, and it makes it much easier on the cloud, right? Because everything's more in one ecosystem that you can tie together a bit better, obviously depending on your model and your organization. But if you haven't got the right people to understand it and really fully utilize it and translate it, for lack of a better term, it's actually a big investment on something that is a nice to have, or is that not actually going to improve matters. And it's the same conversation with data. So it's actually making sure we've got the right resourcing, the right skill set, the right understanding, And this is a new tool looking at old principles but applying it in a new way, and having the right people to be able to make the decision, say this is what this means, and we want to make sure that this dashboard or this metric lands in the right place to help make that decision. Obviously accelerates and makes it much quicker with that holistic overview, sorry for using the word holistic, but that overarching view, a single pane of glass, but actually being making sure that it is giving us the right information. And if we don't do that, we're going to miss a trick with this, because I'll be honest, people haven't got monitoring right. They haven't got the right resources. They haven't got the right people.
I think it's the same. It's a very similar common thing, isn't it? About, we always think about, people, process, technology. That's never gone away. And I think this is a really prime example. I think, Kengo, you both mentioned a very similar thing. It's like we can spend lots of money on systems, and organizations do spend lots of money on different systems. And we don't know what it means, right? And therefore it's difficult. And it's difficult as well then to articulate that, as Ken was saying, back into financial value, right, to an organization in terms of all the things that means financial. Just because something's running slow, or something's not working, or it's not creating the right experience, actually that's probably got a monetized value somewhere. But if we don't know how to deal with and read the information, then yeah, totally agree. I mean, Nathan, you speak to a lot of organizations about exactly this kind of thing, right? Have you got, from what the team have talked about, any kind of thoughts, insights?
Absolutely. I think there's twofold here. Obviously, the first being, and by the way, that tap scenario was really relevant. I must admit, my knowledge in plumbing is somewhat limited. However, converting that to, say, a power scenario, if we think about how we get electricity, obviously there's been efficiency changes over the years. I expect the same when I hit my plug socket, power is received into my charger, to my phone, etc. But ultimately, as we're all aware of, especially over the last 12 months or so, when obviously there are certain energy crises that are relevant, there's other ways you can get power, solar panels, etc. The way we generate it is more efficient. We're optimizing the way we're receiving that. I think thinking of that return on investment element, the same is true around our applications and our environments. There are some easy scenarios. If we take retail, as that was used as an example, what is the impact if the experience of adding an item to a shopping cart on my phone takes me too long? Does that impact the direct return on investment, in the sense of, right, users are getting bored, that it's taken too long, I'm going to go to a different website. The same can be said around our internal systems and our public cloud solutions as well, though, because it's not just about whether something's down or up, or it's not just about the experience is slower. There's efficiencies that can be driven that FSO should drive around optimization of that. And there could be scenarios where hypothetically we have a public cloud spun up with a certain amount of compute size, etc., and that costs us X amount, per day. And actually, when you look at the data from FSO style platforms and systems that it should drive, is being able to see actually the utilization is very minimal 90% of the time, and we could be a bit more elastic or scalable with the way we're spinning up those cloud solutions. In turn, the direct return on investment is obvious to the business, because then you're saying, actually, we can reduce our public cloud spend by X amount because we're not using it. And in our peak moments, a Monday morning where everyone logs in, or everyone goes to that same system at the same time, we make sure it's elastic for that moment in time, and the rest is decreased. So I think the return on investment will transparently vary depending on what your organization's primary business function is from a ROI perspective. But I think the elements should be focused. It's not just the right, what is the experience being up and down, etc., but what efficiencies it can drive elsewhere once you actually have that hard set data, because then it goes beyond just saying something's available and it's got 4 or 5 nines. It goes into, it was available and heavily underutilized. Why are we keeping it up constantly in that manner, especially when it's very SaaS based now in terms of our application stack?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And I'm going to pick on you again in a minute. Sorry about that. We, as Goa said, this is really the next generation, right, of what was just monitoring before. When we were talking about this show before, we were talking about almost the two different. There's more, right, but the two key different areas of where organizations need to or are looking right, at kind of monitoring that little performance, right? So we've got obviously the two parts, right? But the bit I'm really interested in the SaaS side. So we've got the two parts of apps, right? We've got stuff where an organization owns the code, right? So they build their own code, it runs on whatever Python code and SQL databases and all this other stuff, right? And therefore there are independencies and things that happen in the code that can be looked at, optimized, tuned, servers built out, those kind of things. And then we've got the SaaS level of stuff, right? Which obviously we're seeing, and to Ken's point, pretty much all SaaS applications, right? So we have service level agreements with those providers. They run in different cloud environments. They connect to different infrastructure. They'll have different SLAs. And of course, more commonly now, those applications are also talking to each other. So we might have single sign-on between those applications, so single identity source. We might have plugins and connectors that pull information from, for example, Salesforce or something into 365 or wherever it might be. I wonder whether you'd mind, just again for the purpose of everyone on the show and maybe the panel as well, just to give a short summary really of kind of what we're seeing as those two different levels. And in particular, we're talking today really about two of the key Cisco products, right? So App Dynamics and of course Thousand Eyes, which is, is probably the most I've ever got excited about something that monitors application performance. But would you mind just giving a quick summary of the two of those things?
Yeah, of course. So I think you've nailed it quite well. It comes down to what we need that FSO experience around. If you are an organization that is building their own applications, have DevOps teams, and you have interdependencies between some custom written code and the compute you're running either in your own public clouds or in your own private data centers, etc. At that point, you're fundamentally looking at that whole journey, right? It's not just how you reach that server or that code. You're talking about all the interdependencies, and that's where something like Cisco App Dynamics comes in and effectively helps with that whole picture from your explicit lines of code and helping pinpoint, right, this line of code isn't right, or we're seeing too many requests to a database that this server's linking with, etc. And then there's the other side, which is you have obviously AWS, Azure, and you have those marketplaces where you don't think about it. You click at a button, bang, I've got an application available to me. I don't know what that looks like in the background. I'm not worried about how many lines of code or what it was written in. I just now have application there on demand as I need it for as long as I would like it. And obviously at that point, you're not going to be worried about those other elements of that code. You're not going to be doing analysis on that, but you are concerned of that journey of that experience from the user sitting at home or in the office, trying to access that public cloud across a range of infrastructure. And you end up with lots of blind spots fundamentally, whether you're using integrations from that marketplace application to your Active Directory or your identity sources for logins, etc. They're all the kind of the blind spots that you are missing at the moment. And that's where elements like Thousand Eyes comes in. It's not just the monitoring of it though, it does on-demand, fully integrated tests, fundamentally synthetic tests. So at that point, you're going to get the data explicitly at all times on what that user experience is across all the blind spots on the journey to that application. And I always like to call out this side of it, because taking a web application, which largely is what most organizations spin up and you just access it over your web browser, it also can then correlate that to the experience of web loading. So if you want to understand, right, I'm loading certain content from AWS for the front page, but the login box is then linking to Azure, and then this element's linking to a private DNS server we have, it links it all, correlates that to load times, the user experience across that. And again, it can help with those correlation with if a change occurs, you can start pinpointing, oh, on Monday, everyone started saying there was a slower login experience. And I can see on Friday, it took us 2 seconds to load the web page. On Monday, it's taking us 10 seconds. And I can see this whole additional load being demanded from AWS, let's say, and there's been a change on that web application that we just spun up as a SaaS platform. And we didn't see the code change, but we can see the user experience change. And ultimately, it enables the teams to have that correlation to be able to make requests from those third parties and those SaaS providers to go, this is no longer as good as it was. I need it improved. Hopefully
That's
that gives
cool.
a nice summary.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's good. And well, I'll ask the panel in a sec as well, because I think, you know, I'm interested, I guess, from all of you, and I'll pick on someone. I'll put your hand up as always. But you know, if we think about what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about you know, obviously this next generation of monitoring, but in particular, you know, how do we measure, or how can we measure and improve, right? So it's all be about improving the digital experience for customers, users, etc. And you know, with a world that is, and Ken, in your world, of course, where you're pretty much all cloud. I know a lot of you are very heavily on cloud. Actually, what can we do about it, right? And I think that's, you know, I hear this a lot when it's like, well, you know, I remember those days of working with, I used to be an Exchange administrator many years ago. I remember working for a massive university. They had something like 24 Exchange servers or whatever. So we had an issue. It wasn't my fault. We had an issue, and it was, you know, it was a working all weekend, right, trying to get things up and running, and we just about, you know, band-aids over stuff, taking servers down, all this other stuff. And you wind forward to where we are now, where you get an issue with a, you know, an advisory gets issued on Exchange Online or something, and actually there's not a lot you can do about it, right? It's unless it is your issue, it's not your issue. and other than, you know, being on the phone to technical support or checking the logs and stuff, there's not a lot you can do. So I'm really interested in your views on, you know, is this harder now than it was before? Is it easier? Do we, you know, what do we do? Alex?
I think it's harder in the explanation of what you can do for your users. And I think what we are, I wouldn't say reduced to, but if you've put the majority of your eggs in the cloud basket, your primary task is then communication to your end users. If there is a problem in a cloud environment that is impacting your users, they will still look to you for, what do I do? And 9 times out of 10, there's not much you can do. And you can thankfully blame someone else because it's their fault. But knowing that they have got many more engineers on hand that can potentially fix that system than you ever would. And so there's still benefits from outsourcing to a degree certain elements of your tech stack to the cloud. But then it's about, to a degree, crisis management on your side, and how you continue to inform your users of the current state of play, what mitigations there are, you know, can you work locally and it will just sync when things come back online, that sort of thing. It's potentially harder as well if you are, from an IT perspective, located in one area, but you have to support globally as well, because it might be fine for you, but it's only impacting a certain region. But I would say that from our perspective, I think most users are quite accepting and accommodating of that. Touch wood, not many things do go wrong with most of our systems that are in the cloud. And rarely when they do, I think we very rarely get users complaining that a system's down. I think there's more shock that it's gone down than the fact that, oh, it's gone down. And thankfully, it's minutes or, you know, less than an hour or a couple of hours that it's actually down for. It's very rare these days, thankfully, that an outage spans, you know, days or multiple days. So from my team's perspective, it's all about ensuring that we know that there's a problem with a certain application or service, and about who do we know that it impacts on our side. Is it localized to just one department, group of users, a region, or what have you? And then we ensure that we, you know, keep them informed, and also try and stop the almost like the constant communication in terms of other users saying, well, it's fine for me, it's not okay for me, because you can get some people saying, well, it's, you know, well, I'm fine, and then you're trying to manage, you know, their communication as well. So that for me is the key when it comes to these sorts of systems.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, you know, we're talking about you know, digital experience and customers and users, but you're absolutely right. The communication flow around those things has become, you know, so important. I think, you know, IT teams, and it's a bad overall name for everybody, but I think the we talk about skills, right? And Goa, you were talking about the skills needed to understand the data and the information that's coming from these systems. But I think there's also a change of skills required in how we communicate. I think, IT has traditionally had that bad reputation about being good communicators. And I think that's going through a massive shift as well, right? We are about delivering experiences to our users, right? And we rely on this technology every day. And that's a really interesting one as well. I think that's a really good point you made. Jazz, did you have anything to add to that kind of theme?
I suppose nothing new. I suppose only to repeat what others have said. I mean, we've got used to this world where we expect things to be more resilient, as Ken said, and everything just working. So this concept of full stack I can't even say the word. I'm not even going to try now. But FSO, yeah, it becomes a harder sell because why do we want to invest in tools that are going to give us this? But as Goa said, it's one thing investing in tools. There's another thing having the people that understand and digest that information. It's another thing then when you have instance having a playbook in place and the people to execute that playbook to remediate things.
Yeah,
so it's got to be that whole end-to-end piece, and that investment is probably going to be quite substantial as we scale to the cloud. We more often than not reduce our human workforce as a result. But those people are again needed to interrogate this information. I mean, in the space of monitoring tools, as Goa said, we look at tools that offer us that single pane of glass, but then we look at multiple tools that offer us a single pane of glass, and we're looking in many shop windows all of a sudden. It's,
and I think the single panes
yeah, and just to reiterate what Alex was saying, we've got a globally distributed workforce now, and understanding the challenges of one experience in one part of the world to another part of the world, or to even in the same street because they're working with different ISPs, and then trying to determine where those issues are arising and how you communicate that challenge, because we do have that habit of a user identifying an issue or a challenge with a SaaS service, and we assume that user's challenge has got to be with the platform. So we go direct to source there. We're looking at what's going wrong with that platform. Then we investigate and determine their ISP might be throttling something, or there might be something else along that journey that's causing that challenge. But it is becoming more and more difficult. I think there is a need for FSO tools, but it's understanding that investment, that return on investment, and how you manage that. I've probably gone around the houses a bit on that, but yeah, I don't think I'm in any better place than anyone else on this call at the moment as to understanding what the right next step is around these tools.
Yeah, but I think it is a really interesting topic, and I think some of the themes from this are which is, well, I wasn't really thinking the conversation would go, but actually is so powerful, and it is. Does this just help us communicate better, right? I think that's a really good point. Does it help us communicate? Does it help us be in the know? Does it help us answer those difficult questions rather than it's not our fault, it's a Microsoft issue, or it's an AWS issue?
Well, no, I think that bit will persist because it to some extent it's a black box, but it's having the knowledge to understand where the challenges are and be able to challenge with the right people. I mean, to go back to your example earlier, we can't do that thing of just locking the office and locking everyone in for the weekend until we've got everything fixed anymore, because we could be drinking beer and eating pizza all weekend and get no further because somebody else somewhere else is trying to fix that.
But I think
someone else has to fix it.
I think part of the potential problem of an FSO system is what we can do about it. How can you justify spending probably multiple hundreds of thousands on an FSO system when all you're reduced to is saying, yeah, I can see that system's down. I can't actually fix that system. I have not got the capacity, or we are not allowed to fix an Exchange Online problem, but we can see there's a problem down. I think the challenge for us as tech leaders is to try and understand the value between, to an extent, social media posts when Microsoft might say that this system is down, versus having a system that can tell you that this Azure region is down and it impacts. I think what it can give you is you can extrapolate, if Azure is down, this is what it impacts on your side. But if we rely on Microsoft's own Twitter posts telling us when Exchange is down in a certain region, or you wake up in the morning saying, hey, we've got problems. And then we can start to see that our users are having problems, so we can inform our users at that point to say, yeah, Microsoft are having a team issue. It should only be affecting Germany, but it hopefully will be back soon. There's nothing more we can do. So is there value in a FSO application giving us that insight when these companies have to announce when there are certain outages? So that's, I think, from my perspective, that would be a challenge, to find a system that can give you all of that when you can find a lot of it for free almost.
I agree with that, Alex. However, I think going back to Nathan's point earlier about efficiencies in what you're doing, I think that will become more of a play now with AI technologies, because we don't know where resources are going to be challenged. We don't know if it's going to be at the Microsoft stack or somewhere else with ChatGPT and other AI technologies that are going to be far and far more used now. So understanding efficiencies where they can be leveraged there might help us tune our tools to give us that competitive advantage. But it's then qualifying that and building the business case around that's going to be the challenge.
And that's where I was going to go with just a bit, and jumping in on this, is that we've kind of got down a fairly narrow use case. If you start expanding it back out to wider organizations that have, say, their own in-house application development, that they're actually running these services from their own data centers. I used retail as an example. It was amazing actually how much of their own infrastructure they actually had, and running some of that stuff across their own databases, their own services. Yes, they had private and public clouds and all manner of different bits, but the fact that they've internally built all of these applications, that's when there's probably real value that surfaces for that organization. It's when you start talking about FSO as a kind of a blessing for everybody, then I really think that that's not really the case. Because I think, to Alex's point, we have a very simple environment now from where I operate, and it very much is great. Yeah, Microsoft is having a problem, or look, Teams is down, or look, Zoom is having issues with their data center in Asia. I literally cannot fix that, and even getting early insight into the issues doesn't really help, because invariably the first even if you had the best system, the first you are waking up to it. And I've got a Hong Kong office, for example, so I would wake up and I would be getting calls from Hong Kong telling me, hey, we've got a few problems with Zoom, we've moved to Teams, don't worry about it, right? It'd be like, oh, okay. It's and so there is some self-healing going on there. There's everything else, and so the idea of spending a lot of money on an FSO solution for me is challenging. But then if you are a retailer, a global retailer with a shop in Hysan Place in Hong Kong and another one in Beijing, and actually a store in Covent Garden, and you're having a problem with your stock control, having that internally as knowledge, or you're running a railway network or something really complex where you're getting ahead of, we've got a signaling issue with X and we now realize that's going to affect the stations in London. Again, it's very much use case specific. I think that's a piece that we probably, and I will let you jump across priorities. I'm taking and I absolutely double down on what Goa said. If you haven't got the people who understand it, and even if you throw some AI at it, if you don't understand the implications of what you're seeing, again, it has zero value. I think that's and getting that mapped out. Any organization have all of its processes 100% mapped out, so it understands what it means. That's a big job.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's this has been a phenomenal topic, and we're nearly out of time actually. But I think I have a couple of points just to kind of pull together. I think it's interesting when we talk about, if we think about the example you used there, Ken, of the the retailer all on premises environments. We used to use monitoring tools and things in the day. I remember doing it years ago at a university I worked at, and that was all about using performance metrics and loading and those things to quantify and justify upgrades, right? Upgrades to data centers, more servers, these kind of things. And I think we're perhaps almost trying to solve the same thing, but in maybe different ways of looking at, actually we've got a role of understanding where the problems are, right? And without swearing on air, it's I see some of these tools as a bit of an F-off stick, as about actually we understand where the issue is, right? We know, for example, early that we're seeing some delays in DNS, or we're seeing some delays in I don't know, a connector that's talking to another third-party service that's hosted somewhere else. So we're starting to see early visibility of things, which I guess is good, right? In that we know that something might happen before it does. In some cases, that can help us switch to alternate. So, a point that that you made about, we might have alternate meeting collaboration platforms, or we might be able to switch to another system, maybe, depending on how we work around those things. But also, I think it gives us ammunition sometimes, particularly when we're talking about, data providers, for example. So that could be, and I don't want to keep blaming Virgin Media, but whoever our supplier is, right? Is actually, do we use this information to help us beat them up, right? To understand, look, we know these issues are, it's very common, and I see it all the time with cloud providers, where until you get to a certain point where they recognize it is a global issue or a major issue that they have publicized, Alex, to your point, on social, a lot of the time they do everything they can to avoid blame until the point they acknowledge it and the clock starts ticking. So I think there's a couple of things that kind of go around. Is it almost the same problem that we had before that's just now different, and we therefore need different tools to monitor those things because we're not in control of our core infrastructure?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, Rob, quickly, and I think it was just listening, really, really interesting, and I wanted to kind of give FSO a little bit of better press than what we've probably given it so far. And I think if used right, it can actually help with the efficiencies and improvements. And I think that's the important part. The app stack, for example, the web-facing services, we can use FSO in the right way. And this is a big if, because I feel like we're in this world where we're trying to solve problems that don't exist. And I see this on TikTok all the time, where people are inventing things to a problem that isn't actually a problem, or whatever it is. Like, FSO is in danger of becoming a thing that we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist, because we've got monitoring, we've got visibility. But where FSO can be really valuable is if you've got the foundations right. So if you've got your monitoring and your applications and your monitoring and implementing that in the right place, if you've got those in a good place, then FSO becomes super valuable. Because if you need to shave off a couple of milliseconds off of a user experience over a period of time, over that journey, then it makes it much better, right? So if we can save 5 seconds on a user journey for a customer who's trying to buy something on our web portal, then that's fantastic, because then that means that you can increase the revenue, and that's where FSO comes into its own. But if we're just using it as another way of just monitoring things that we already monitor, good or bad, there's no value to it. There's no return on investment, because all you're doing is, it becomes that stick to say, leave us alone, we know the problem, and by the way, here's another dashboard to prove that there's the problem. So that value has to come from being able to give something back and say, well, it tells us the bad stuff, but also this is the great stuff that we can learn from it, because this user journey is really bad versus this user journey, but we know why that is, because it's hitting a SQL database, or we've got this blocking point, etc., etc. So I think that's where FSO, if people are on that journey, get those foundations in a good place, because then that's where the value comes. And that's my 2 pennies worth, at least.
No, and I think that's amazing. I think, like a lot of these things, it's about what comes first, doesn't it? I think, it's do the tools help us understand where the problems are, that we need to invest that time and effort in making sure the rest of our environment is in order, or do these tools become, and I think probably a bit of both, right? Do these tools become the thing that help us go, it's not us, it's them? It's funny, I was chatting to a legal firm last week about, and weirdly, they're very, very, well, not weirdly, but they're very heavily VDI, right? Really, really heavily VDI. But they were playing around with, do they put VDI in the cloud or do they keep it on-prem? And they've got a really, really huge but aging infrastructure. They've got lots of need to move it away for sustainability reasons, all these kind of things. And when you actually dig a little bit deeper, they have so many performance issues with it, but they don't know where it is. They just don't know where it is. And everyone just blames the VDI. But when you actually talk to the wider IT teams in different sections, because that's always the challenge of getting people, your point, what tools do people use? And so they've got a team of people that look after the VDI environment. They don't talk to the application team. And it turns out actually a lot of the issues aren't really the VDI environment. it's the applications, but it's all the people that complain about it who are fee owners, in their case, use the VDI. So their view of the world and what they've been told is it's the VDI, not the apps. And I think this is where that point of it's about joining teams together and making sure people are talking to each other, and it is probably about having a common set of or a common view of actually where are those issues, because it, you go back to that blame game, both internally and of course with our vendors. So potentially this is something that, I think this is potentially an area where there is value, right, in helping to understand where to start. But no, great set of topics. I think we're just about out of time, but it's been a really, really interesting discussion. Nathan, thank you for joining the show today as our guest. I know you've had probably less to talk about than we thought, but do you have any closing thoughts and comments?
I think the topic's been very insightful for everyone, hopefully. I would just add on the FSO point is absolutely, we've nailed some really good use cases there, depending on your environment, but also to just scale it back quickly to that SaaS conversation. Absolutely, it does provide the ability for you guys to have that, as you eloquently put it, Rob, a F-off stick fundamentally. But actually, the goal is to provide simplification and quickness on that. So yes, if a scenario was explicitly 100% out your control in one office, you can identify it. It's about being able to see it like that, avoid any additional of your resource and time spent on that. So the elements of providing return on investment is still relevant to better provide analysis and tooling than you traditionally have there. That doesn't typically cost a huge amount, because I know we've mentioned cost a few times. They implied it costs lots of money, and obviously everyone has different perspectives of what lots of money is. But actually, yes, if you want to do full FSO, let's say everything can go all the way, yes, that will cost a little. But if you want to just have that, bang, I can see it's that, I can see who it's at, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cost you a huge amount, and you can then provide those insights. And that's something, again, I'm always happy to delve into with a panel and the wider audiences as needed.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We're just about out of time, so thanks again for joining. I'm sure I'll speak to you all very soon, but thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Still feel free to put your comments in the LinkedIn chat. We'll endeavour to follow up on them. But as always, panel, thank you so much for taking time out your busy jobs and talking about these key topics. So see you all soon. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks all.
Cheers. Bye-bye.